A promising young artist, Candy White, meets Dan, who introduces her to his world of drug-induced dreams. Neither of them has a job, but that doesn't stop them from borrowing money every day, sometimes from their acquaintance Casper, a former pharmacist, and sometimes from Candy's parents. Following Candy's advice, Dan lies to her parents, pretending he wants to prepare a surprise for their daughter. Candy's father doesn't fully trust Dan, but still lends him money. The two steal anything that's not nailed down and spend all the money on drugs. One day, they go to a pawn shop to pawn a ring that Candy's grandmother gave her. When they return, Candy says the pawnbroker only offered $25 for the ring, an insultingly low amount. After hesitating, Candy says she'll be right back, claiming the pawnbroker promised to figure something out. She goes inside and the owner locks the door behind her. A few minutes later, Candy returns with $50, which she earned by performing a sexual favor for the pawnbroker. Despite everything, sometime later, Dan and Candy decide to get married. Even at their wedding, the two manage to get high by taking turns locking themselves in the bathroom, confusing the guests. When Dan comes out, he collapses on the couch. Candy's mother, suspecting drug use, asks what's wrong with him. Candy lies, saying he just drank too much champagne. After the wedding, Candy starts working in a brothel, serving different men. She gives the money she earns to Dan, who uses it to buy drugs from his dealer. When he comes home late one day after getting high in the park, Candy slaps him for not bringing her dose on time. She explodes, tired of pleasing sweaty men, and demands that Dan call a gay man named Bletz and start making money by loosening up. Dan refuses, afraid of catching something from that gay army. If there were demand for scrawny guys like him to service women, he'd be rich, but using his backside is out of the question. One morning, Phil, a real estate agent, comes by. Dan and Candy owe months of back rent. Candy admits they have no money. She's a prostitute, Dan's unemployed, and they're both addicts. The couple goes to Casper, who offers them a new drug he invented himself. Casper's a professor of organic chemistry. Since his students didn't show up that day, he spent an hour creating a miracle solution. After taking it, Candy passes out. Dan starts asking Casper about gay sex work, curious whether it's required to open the back door for paying clients. Casper tells him to visit the park where that crowd gathers and ask them directly. The next day, Dan goes to a park restroom where a couple is already making out in a stall. Pretending to just wash his hands, he notices a car outside with a wallet on the seat and an unlocked door. He steals the wallet, but it contains no cash. Using the driver's license, he finds the owner's number in a phone book and calls, pretending to be a good Samaritan who wants to return the wallet. They agree to meet the next morning. Before the meeting, Dan goes to a bank, pretending he forgot his card's PIN. The manager refuses to help, even though Dan looks exactly like the wallet's owner. Dan then calls the owner again, pretending to be bank security. He claims there was suspicious activity on the cards and asks for the PIN. Using this scam, Dan manages to withdraw nearly $7,000. Ecstatic, he runs home to tell Candy, and she reveals she's pregnant. They decide to keep the baby, which means quitting drugs, a monumental challenge. They last 4 agonizing days before Candy finally calls Casper, begging for help. When he doesn't respond, she calls other acquaintances while Dan turns off the phone. She suffers a breakdown, and when Dan tries to comfort her, he finds blood. At the hospital, a doctor tells Dan that Candy must give birth immediately, but the baby is too premature to survive. After losing the child, they relapse. Dan waits for Candy to finish with clients so they can spend the money on another fix. Eventually, they move out of the city and buy an old, dilapidated house. Candy's parents visit. Her mother offers to help cook, but finds the chicken still frozen and scolds Candy and Dan, blaming Dan for dragging Candy into addiction. Candy screams back that for 6 years she's felt imprisoned, and only with Dan has she felt free. Eventually, Dan finds part-time work, but when he comes home one day, he finds Candy with their neighbor, Paul. She leaves with Paul, returning early the next morning. When Dan tries to talk, Candy says everything about him annoys her. The next day, he wakes to find her scribbling insults about him and her mother on the walls. After work, he discovers more writings describing their first meeting, her first dose, and the loss of their child. Dan goes to Casper's place, shoots up, and falls asleep. The next morning, Candy's father calls. Candy had another breakdown and is in the hospital. Dan visits with her parents but doesn't get to speak with her. Her father tells him, "I don't care who's to blame. I only care about my daughter." Dan returns to Casper's and finds him dead from an overdose. of his own drug. Time passes. Dan works as a dishwasher in a restaurant. Candy continues treatment, and Dan secretly dreams of seeing her again someday. One day, Candy shows up at the restaurant. Dan tells his boss to say he's not there, but the boss insists he go out. Dan sees Candy. She looks healthier. Thanks to the clean country air, she says. They kiss like they did the day they met, but Dan tells her there's no going back. Their future holds nothing good, only memories. Realizing he wants to end things, Candy silently walks away, leaving him alone.